Okay, so welcome to the third part of the fifth episode. I'm just gonna try to get through this as quick as I can because I know I'm running low on battery for my camera. I have like, what, 8 more chapters to go? Yeah. And the ninth episode picks up with Nat. Um, Jim, Nat, Tiny, and Carrie have all made it back to college, and after the whole ordeal of her leaving, they start to wonder what the future of the 8-minute band holds. If, especially with Nat and Bella soon to leave after this year. And so they decide to have a tryout for a new lead singer who's going to take over after Nat leaves. And so they decide to hold a tryout for competition, I guess you could say, between Tiny, who can also sing, and Jim's friend, Kimmy. And so the two of them, in kind of like a glee-ish kind of thing, they sing the songs that go along with this episode: Roar and Brave. Roar by Katy Perry, Brave by Sarah Bareilles. I picked that song because I picked those songs because I've heard a mashup online, and I feel like those two songs really go well with each girl and their singing abilities, I should say. Not to be mean to either Katy Perry or Sarah Bareilles, but I feel that anyway. And the 10th episode deals with Nick again, and it deals with Nick finally meeting and realizing that he had seen Raquel's boyfriend before because he is in college and they are actually next door neighbors in the dorm. He meets the guy whose name is Kevin. So you're actually formally introduced to him in this episode. And Nick finds out that Kevin is not exactly the nicest guy. And in sort of like a psychological game, what happens is Kevin decides to rub it in Nick's face that he's dating Raquel now. And so what happens is Nick can hear the song that goes along with this episode through the walls, which is "I'll Make Love to You" by Voice to Men, and it eats at Nick because he's so sure that they're doing the deed in Kevin's room. And like I said, it sets up like Nick finally meeting Kevin and all this, and he realizing that, showing that he really does feel like he needs to get Raquel away from Kevin, even if it means, damaging like their relationship further between Nick and Raquel. And so the 11th episode is a Christmas episode, moving along through the eyes of Nat. If you've ever read any of my books on Tumblr, my chapters on Tumblr, sorry, I did have a long one on Christmas Eve. And it wasn't this year, it was the other year. It was actually through the eyes of Kimmy, who was a main character, like I said before. Actually, her name was Eleanor in that book, but it's basically the same plot, kind of, but through the eyes of Nat instead. And it's just her. It's really all about her and Jim, and how she still isn't sure and definitely doesn't want to be in a relationship with Jim after her having I guess it's like a wonderful life kind of moment during on Christmas Eve. And the song that goes with that is "Last Christmas" by Wham. The 12th episode is Through the Eyes of Nick again, and it's about him and Kevin again. And by this time, obviously it's the new year, so by this time Nick has started to lose quite a good amount of weight, and so Nick decides to see if he can one-up Kevin in hopes of like ripping him and Raquel apart. So he decides to challenge Kevin to some kind of like a running contest like a contest, like they want to see who's faster. And the song that goes along with that is Everything You Want by Vertical Horizon, because Nick is still so focused on getting Raquel back and driving Kevin away from her, especially. And anyway, moving along, the 13th episode is Back Through the Eyes of Nat. This episode I believe I've had in the last iteration, I'm not sure in the book, but it deals with Nat, Nat and Tiny, I guess, really, and their background about their dad, who is an army soldier, who has never really been around that much recently for his two daughters because he's been deployed and been fighting. So he comes back, and it just shows like how Nat really just doesn't want him, didn't like that he left, and her damaged relationship with her father. And so that's the song that goes with that is Where'd You Go by Fort Minor, because I feel like that song really conveys how she feels, right? When he comes back and tries to reinsert himself into her life. The 14th episode goes through the eyes of Nick. It kind of really wraps up the arc between Nick and Raquel. Not really, but it wraps up his arc in this season. And it's with all this stuff that he's been doing with him and Kevin, that's when Raquel finally decides to just straight up go up to him and ask him what the hell he's doing. And so they argue. Nick tries to say his point, and then he starts to realize that maybe they aren't really good for each other, that they're best when they're not dating. And the song that goes along with that is The One That Got Away, the cover by Boyce Avenue. So that ends with basically Nick realizing that maybe, like I said, that they probably aren't going to get back together, but he still does want to break up Kevin and Raquel. The 15th episode wraps up Nat's arc when she first meets Carrie. What happens is they've moved in, they've been roommates for a while, and Nat finally figures out that Carrie plays for the other team, so to speak. And this whole time that she realizes that Carrie has fallen in love with Nat, and Nat really doesn't know how to feel about that. And it's just it starts to confuse her, and the song that goes along with that is Sweet Caroline by Neil Diamond, just because of Carrie Caroline. And the last episode, really quick, is Through the Eyes of Nick, and that sets up a major story arc for the third year. And when he finds out that 8 Minutes, their band, is has been contacted to open for Jim's old band, who's reuniting on a tour. And so Jim's a little conflicted. He's he wants 281 he wants 8 Minutes to prosper, but he's not sure if he wants to go back to the old life of being in a boy band again. But eventually, Nick and everybody talks him into it, and they decide to take that gig, and that sets up everything in year 3 as they start with the worldwide tour. And that's everything for this episode, or for this season. Thanks for watching.